Good evening. Good evening. I'm going to have to stand here so that those in Zoom land can see me. Welcome to the Shoals Marine Laboratory's weekly marine science seminar. I'm Sarah Morris, the John M. Kingsbury Executive Director of the Shoals Marine Lab, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for our evening's lecture, our ninth Rock Talk of this 2024 season. Our seminars are affectionately known as Rock Talks because back in the day, the early days of the lab, the faculty would actually give lectures and seminars out in the intertidal on the rocks. We've now moved into the Higgins Commons, which is full tonight, despite only having two classes. It's wonderful to see everyone here. So that our entire island community can enjoy these weekly seminars. The seminars range from a variety of different topics that relate to the marine sciences and the environment. For those of you joining us online this evening, and maybe new to our lab's community, the Shoals Marine Lab is the oldest and largest marine lab dedicated to the undergraduate training, including both coursework and training as researchers. The lab is operated jointly by Cornell University and the University of New Hampshire. In addition to our guests joining us online this evening, we have two courses on island: Investigative Marine Biology Laboratory, whose faculty member, Doug Fudge, celebrated his birthday today on island. Sorry, Doug. And Shark Biology and Conservation. We also have our summer undergraduate research group, affectionately known as SURGES, who are in week 8 of their summer-long research projects. We're excited to have everyone here with us this evening, both in person and online. The format for tonight's seminar is 45 minutes of a talk, followed by about 15 minutes of Q&A. For our friends online, we do ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will read your online questions aloud, and we will pass around a mic for the questions that come from anyone who is here on the island. With that, I would now like to invite Eliza Buck to the podium, who will introduce this evening's speaker.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eliza. I'm a staff member out here on the Shoals. I grew up in Durham. I've been coming out to the lab for the past 7 years, and I've worked out in the kitchen for the past 4. So it's my honor to affectionately known by the Woodland Road children at the Dudley. Ms. Dudley, excuse me, not Miss. So most of my childhood, I knew her as owner of the yard that's the file, and a woman who somehow always had a box of fireworks at ready for any neighborhood cookout that we was having. So most like recently, in the past year or so, I learned more about who she was as a political and social activist. This began in my African American history class that I took at Richmond High School when we watched the film Shadows Fall Moon, which briefly describes her and her husband Tom's efforts to free 2 Black veterans of Vietnam who had been wrongly convicted after the prison. From there, I learned the book The Small Town Big Whale, which is a history of the fight to preserve the very islands we're on today from an oil refinery. And that is the story that we're about to hear tonight. It describes Dudley's courage and the legacy that he has left on the Seacoast. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to
Technology is not my thing.
Okay, I'm really happy to be here this evening. I'm particularly happy that there's no reverberation from this thing. That's great. That's great. I'd like to begin with a video. A very short video, 6 minutes. It's called The Battle for Durham.
There is nothing so powerful as truth. There is nothing so powerful as truth, and often nothing so strange.
New Hampshire is rich with natural beauty. Its 18 miles of beaches and rugged coastline are fed by a web of 18 miles of beaches and rugged coastline are fed by a web of rivers and estuaries that fuel the economy for many New Hampshire communities. This is a story about legacy and how the actions of ordinary people can impact the lives of many for generations to come. It is also a story about today. Energy needs. And balancing the reality of our energy needs and understanding our responsibilities to our community and to our descendants. But to understand this responsibility, we must first take a step back into the past.
Because of its extreme cold and because it has no oil refineries, New England is hard hit by the fuel shortage. But somebody is trying to do something about it. And David
Aristotle,
Culhane
Socrates,
reports.
Onassis, business executive, Aristotle, Socrates, Onassis, business executive, ship owner, and oil magnate. In fact, one of the richest men in the world. And where is he today? In Concord, New Hampshire, conferring with state officials and businessmen about building the first oil refinery in New England. Right here on the wild shores and tidal estuaries of Durham Point.
The lines were drawn for the Battle of Durham Point. This flamboyant Greek billionaire was used to getting what he wanted. Heading up the 7,000-member opposition group, Save Our Shores, was the young Durham native, Nancy Sandberg.
It took about 3 meetings, but it pretty well got sorted out. Nancy Sandberg was everyone's unanimous choice to be the president of the group. A Republican as well. She was a native of Durham and a Republican as well, a very loyal Republican. And would be a much better spokesman for us. Felt that she would be a much better spokesman for us than some of us who were feeling a bit radical about the proposal.
If the Olympic comes in here, the economic value of this area could be completely lost.
It was our last
that's why we
stand.
fought so hard. It was our last
Our
stand.
town was worth fighting for to preserve it.
Our town was worth fighting
to preserve it.
And the town As is now, the land is residentially zoned, and the town votes today on whether to rezone it for industrial use. Even if Durham votes no to the refinery, the governor and some state legislators feel the state should make the final decision.
If we really want it, then we can't quibble on some of these alternatives as to site selection.
The fate of Durham Point relied on the skills of freshman state representative Dudley.
Dudley she was one of our local jumped into it very quickly. She was one of our local state representatives at that time.
I was a freshman, 7 years old, state legislator.
And
all of a sudden,
7 years old or so.
my town, where I had lived all my life,
all of a sudden, it seemed
as though my town, where I had lived all my life,
was under siege.
Onassis is more than $500,000 worth of big city expertise to back him up.
It is being supported by the most powerful people in the state.
And it
the
is
governor,
being supported by the most powerful people in the state, the governor, the editor of the only statewide newspaper.
Apparent that
It suddenly became apparent that this was something very, very big.
Aristotle Onassis, the Greek shipping billionaire, wants to build a $600 million oil refinery along the New Hampshire coast. The plan must be approved by a vote of the residents involved, and there is considerable opposition. So Onassis is personally campaigning for his plan.
Onassis looked to William Lowe. To sell his story to the public, Onassis looked to William Lowe, who ran a publisher of the state's largest newspaper, in favor of the refinery. Who ran a steady stream of news and editorials in favor of the refinery.
Does Olympic's promise still stand? Namely, to uphold the wishes of the people of Durham, and if not, how are we expected to believe any of your other promises?
Phyllis Bennett, a local newspaper. They had started public occurrences. A local newspaper. They called it public occurrences. The rumors were flying, but they were the ones that broke the story that it was the rumors were flying, but they were the ones that broke the story that it was oil refinery and it was Onassis.
The balance, it was like David and Goliath in the sense that our circulation, their circulation was about 5,000 at that point. Their circulation was energy crisis, 50,000 or more.
Almost right now with the energy crisis, I think it's almost unpatriotic to think against something that's going to help really all of New England, New Hampshire especially.
We were told that for economic reasons we should do it for moral reasons. For economic reasons we should do it for moral reasons. You can put an oil refinery in every neighborhood. You can put an oil refinery in every
the picturesque New England farmland would become a tank farm. The picturesque New England farmland would become a tank farm, sprouting 50 or more tanks to store 25 million gallons of fuel.
I'm not sure that if the same, or a similar proposal was made now, that a similar group could be.
I believe we are stewards of our planet. I believe we are stewards of our planet and of our state and country and of our state and town. And if we don't care for it and preserve it for the subsequent generations, we're just abusing then the gift we're just abusing the gift we've been given.
On Article 14. Now the official count. 13 on Article 14. Ballots cast. 1,398 ballots cast.
Let us set as our national goal that by the end of this decade, let us set as our national goal that by the end of this decade, we will have developed the potential to meet our own energy needs without depending on any foreign energy sources.
There. Thank you. I love telling this story. I'll tell you something. This is a story that is 50 years old. This is the 50th anniversary year of this story. I was in this, I think it was this very room 25 years ago to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the story. So it's been a long time coming in my life and in the lives of people in the Seacoast. It's quite amazing. And I thank you for coming to listen to it. My life divides into two parts, before the oil refinery and after the oil refinery. And I was not alone. Many women and men of Durham and surrounding communities fought tirelessly as well. Chief among them were Nancy Sandberg and Phyllis Bennett, as you have seen. They had become my best friends for life. And here is the protagonist in the story, Aristotle Onassis, the world's richest man. Clearly, very few of you were born 50 years ago. And so you may never have heard of him, but he was a powerful, an extremely powerful man, the richest man in the world. And here he is with Jackie Kennedy, President Kennedy's widow, on their wedding day, Kennedy and Onassis's. Less than a week later, Onassis was huddled with Stavros Niarchos and George Papadopoulos, the Greek prime minister. They were plotting something they referred to as the Omega Project, which was to be a compilation of heavy industry items such as aluminum smelting plants, steel mills, oil refineries. And Onassis's part in this was to be the oil refineries and the shipping that went with them. This resulted in this beseeching band of bandits imploring the citizens of the Seacoast to trust them and to allow the construction of what was to be the world's largest oil refinery, a 400,000 barrel a day refinery, almost twice as big as the largest oil refinery in the world, the Exxon refinery in Texas. There would be tanks capable of storing 30 million barrels of oil. There would be a massive terminal for offloading supertankers at the Isles of Shoals. And in this drawing, we have Onassis front and center. To his right is Peter Boris, the real estate agent who maneuvered to get options and was previously known for nothing more than his invention of something called the endless loaf of bread. Behind him is William Lowe, editor of New Hampshire's only statewide newspaper and only recently accused of molesting his two stepdaughters, ages 5 and 7. And to his left is the governor at the time, Meldrum Thompson. Now, lost in the mists of time is any information on how the members of this group got together, how they found one another, and whose idea it was to build a supertanker port at the Isles of Shoals and a refinery in lovely Great Bay. It could have happened at a cocktail party in New York, where Thompson met Onassis or his representative. And Thompson, the governor, is not an unlikely initiator of such a plan because, after all, it was he who had the harebrained scheme to get Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket to secede from Massachusetts to join New Hampshire. And the carrot that he offered them was the promise of a nuclear power plant. But I digress. The carrots that Onassis was offering New Hampshire were cheaper and more plentiful fuel, jobs, and lower taxes. Now you have to think about the economy at the time. There was a huge oil shortage in this country. This is a picture of cars lined up on the day that they would be allowed to get their cars filled with fuel. If your name began with A to M, you could go on a Monday. If it was from N to Z, you'd go on a Friday. So that was not a pleasant thing. As I said, Onassis was offering New Hampshire cheaper and more plentiful fuel, jobs, and lower taxes. When it turned out the job would not be provided for people who worked from New Hampshire because they had no experience in oil refineries, that took out the offering, the carrot that Onassis was using there. When it came to lower taxes, it turned out that the only thing that would be taxed would be the administration building. All of the plants, the storage facilities would not be because they were not real estate. So, and Onassis knew that New Hampshire people are historically tax averse. It's true. And he promised to lower our property taxes in Durham, but once again, because the administration building was the only building that would be taxable. And here's what we in Durham were giving up. Beautiful Great Bay. I was a freshman legislator in 1973. I had not spoken on the floor of the legislature. I was a real rookie, but I had some seasoned friends, one of whom was a lawyer from Concord, New Hampshire, named Marty Gross, who's sitting at my kitchen table just after I was elected, said to me, if you ever want to get anything through the New Hampshire legislature, use these two words, home rule. I took that advice and I tucked it away. and didn't think about it for about a year. The legislature met in biennial sessions at that time. And to introduce a bill in an off year, it was required that it be shown to be responding to an emergency. So I looked up the word emergency. This is what I found. Emergency, an unforeseen combination of circumstances that calls for immediate action, an urgent need for assistance or relief. And I successfully argued that point to the speaker, that the proposal to impose an oil refinery on my town constituted an emergency. And then I recalled Marty Gross's wise words: I would use home rule as the foundation of my bill. Now, home rule is not a noble concept. It's pretty conservative, but it was the highest rung on any ladder that I could reach. Home rule already existed in New Hampshire. For instance, the community has the right to approve certain potentially intrusive activities, such as gambling or the sale of liquor or cigarettes or racetracks. And I figured that an oil refinery would surely be as intrusive as any of those. And so I introduced House Bill 18, a very simple bill, which simply said, this bill would require a vote of approval of a majority of the town's voters prior to the approval of the site plan for an oil refinery. And we were off to the races. Now here is a scale model of the refinery, but it is a very minimal. It looks so neat, so clean, so tidy, and so small compared to what they really had in mind. With one site, on-site storage sufficient to hold 30 million barrels. Can you imagine? There were many, many more tanks than this that would have been required for a 400,000 barrel a day refinery. But this was what Onassis, his attempt to show us what a refinery would look like. I want to just remind you, 400,000 barrels every day. If it was being refined at 400,000 barrels, that means 400,000 barrels of oil was coming in and 400,000 barrels was going out. So can you imagine the number of trucks, the huge trucks that would have to be used to get that amount of oil out of there? State Senator Katie Wheeler had written to Onassis protesting the refinery. He replied that a refinery is really a lovely thing, clean as a clinic, and at night when it lit up, it looked just like a Christmas tree. But we in New Hampshire know better. The Onassis land grab was truly Olympic. This map, the red on this map shows the extent early on, very early on, of land that Onassis was able to option for the refinery. There was more that had not been optioned when this illustration was created by SOS, the organization that Nancy Sandberg founded. In fact, before it was over, more than 1/3 of the land at Durham was optioned. But it wasn't only Durham that was at risk. Note the red line extending from the mainland to the Isles of Shoals. And that line is the pipeline that would have brought crude oil offloaded from Olympics tankers at the Shoals to mainland Rye, and then across land in huge pipes to the refinery in Durham. It was not until early December that the minutes of the Star Island Corporation first indicate knowledge of the refinery proposal and its implications for Star Island and the Shoals. Reading now from the minutes of the annual meeting held in December of that year, I read, quote, the president then announced that the meeting would turn to a consideration and discussion of the most serious threat which has been made to the Isles of Shoals, that of shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis and Governor Thompson of New Hampshire, who are trying in every possible way to secure for New Hampshire an oil refinery and an offshore terminal located between the Shoals and the mainland. This offshore terminal, so located, poses a serious threat to our operation and to that of the Shoals Marine Lab on Appledore. The Star Island minutes continue, saying, One Loeb, that's the publisher of the Manchester Union. One Loeb was publisher of a Manchester, New Hampshire newspaper, and who was working closely with Governor Thompson and Olympic in this matter, published a lead editorial under the attractive caption, "Let the Yankee Bastards Freeze." Another caption in Loeb's paper claimed that the women of Durham were, quote, beating their little breasts, end quote. Onassis fervently wanted that jewel of New Hampshire's crown, the lovely Isles of Shoals. And here we see, of course, Celia's garden on Appledore. Onassis wanted a superport in the lee of the Isles of Shoals. Now, you know there is no lee at the Isles of Shoals, I'm sure. This is what was intended for Star Island. And another one. There would be two piers planned, one the length of 3.5 football fields that would accommodate 90 super tankers a year, and another the length of 3 football fields that would accommodate 179 smaller tankers annually. A gigantic mono buoy to store crude or refined oil was proposed. Star Island would be used for a radar installation and as a staging area for swapping crews. And as the plans were made more fully public, response grew and the Star Island Corporation stated, "We believe we have the resources, human and financial, to maintain our position on Star Island and will utilize these resources to the fullest extent to protect our interests." And Rosamond Thaxter, owner of Smutty Nose, announced in her indomitable way, "Only over my dead body will anyone unload tankers there." Many shoalers were in touch with Star Island officials offering whatever help was needed to oppose the project. Lobsterman Norm Foy, whose family owned Cedar Island, and Ed Warrington and Rodney Sullivan, both landowners on Appledore, were recorded as being against any oil terminal anywhere near the shoals. John Kingsbury, director of the Shoals Lab, stated that even a small oil spill in that area would be enough to put the lab out of business. This was at risk today. Olympic tried to auction several islands, but failed until he turned his attention to rugged and beautiful Lunging Island. Peter Boris, real estate agent from Keene, pursued the Randalls, owners of Lunging Island, with a deceptive vengeance. He told Mrs. Randall that he wanted the 5-acre island for a resort development. In Durham, we heard that the Randalls had been contacted, but we were sure they would hold out because after all, they had had a son who was killed in Vietnam and he was buried on the island. Mrs. Randall said, "This is one of the most beautiful spots we have on the Atlantic coast. This area should remain inviolate. It's an important part of the nation's beginnings that most people never hear about." In fact, Lunging Island was the fishing bait of the London Company as early as 1615. The Randalls said they weren't interested in selling. They did not hear any more about it for several weeks until a real estate agent showed up representing Peter Boris. By this time, the Randalls had read press accounts of the refinery and were putting 2 and 2 together. They asked the realtor directly if the sale was related to the rumored oil refinery, and eventually they were told that it was. Mr. Randall felt it was time to meet with lawyers. The lawyers said that if the refinery went through, the state would likely take Randall to the land by eminent domain as being for a public purpose to provide oil in an emergency, and they would probably be paid a lot less than Olympic was offering. When they were told that 2 other islands had been optioned, untrue, and the owners of a third were, quote, listening. The Randalls finally succumbed to Olympic's deception and bullying tactics, and they offered the land, the island. Mrs. Randall said, it's like a death in the family of somebody very close. Now, look carefully at that house, because the next two slides will also show you that house. It's the house, there it is, circled in red. That gives you an idea of where it was on the island and its scale. And here is another picture of the island with the house, and that's the scale of which to which the ship would come totally burying the island. A frightening prospect. The question of land being optioned was a big one, and there were real heroes. Here's an issue of public occurrences. One family still holding out. There was a family named Bouchard, and they had a fabulous ancient house that had been in their family for years and years. Mr. Bouchard was a janitor at the Memorial Union building, and the house, he lived in the house with his mother. He was offered $1 million to sell the option to his house, and Mr. Bouchard said, "Let's go where I live." It's one of my heroes. There were options on Durham Point for more than 1,000 acres. And before the whole thing was over, a third of Durham's land had been optioned. All through the fall and into the winter, Nancy Sandberg and SOS members were busy collecting signatures on a petition to the governor opposing the oil refinery. I said that I would be happy to take the petition to the governor. I would go to Concord with it and give it to him. I called the governor's office to make an appointment, and I was given a time. When the day approached, it was canceled, so I made another. It too was canceled. The governor would be out of the state by get to deal with it. But eventually I got an appointment that was not canceled, and I made my way to Concord. When I got there, I went to the governor's council chambers to wait to see Governor Thompson. I waited and I waited and I waited. The press was there hoping to get a picture of the governor receiving the petitions. We waited some more. Finally, a photographer asked if he could take a picture of me with the petitions, and I said, sure. And he snapped this picture just as the governor's secretary asked me to come in. This is what I call praised legislator. The governor asked me why I had brought him the petitions, and I said I had brought him because I thought he would want to know how thousands of his constituents felt. He asked how I knew they were his constituents, and I said because Nancy Sandberg made sure there was a column for them to record where they lived. Then he asked how we could tell if they were voters, and I told him there was a column for that too. We had a short discussion about the fact that the gas shortage did not have refined oil, but of crude. He became so angry, he told me to, quote, get off your high horse and get out of here, which is just what I did. I curbed the impulse to slam his very large, heavy oak door. The Olympic officials very much wanted to be heard. They invited all skeptics to a meeting at the UNH field house. They promised to answer all questions. But it didn't go well for them. Here's just one example. The Olympic proposals had stated that the refinery would use 6,000 gallons of fresh water every minute. Cliff Horrigan, a UNH graduate student and a hydrologist, asked Mr. Green, the leader of the Olympic consultants, where they planned to get 6,000 gallons. Green conferred with his colleagues on the stage and came back to announce that they realized they had made a big mistake. They really only needed 3,000 gallons. To her credit, Cliff was undeterred, and she asked where they would get 3,000 gallons. Once again, Green consulted his colleagues in the captain's chairs behind him and returned to the microphone to say that they recognized a further error and would need only 1,500 gallons. And the place went wild. There were no believers in the room. Town meeting day came. With Joe Michael as a strict and even-handed moderator, the meeting got underway. The only thing to be discussed that night was the oil refinery. Other more typical warrant articles were put off for another day. Nancy Sandberg spoke and got a standing ovation. Tommy Thompson made the unpopular case for the refinery. There were many who spoke, but finally it was time for the town to vote. And vote it did. By a margin of 9-1, Durham voted in opposition to the refinery. Now, the vote in Durham had absolutely no legal effect. It meant nothing. It was a referendum that indicated the town's feeling, no less, but no more. And on March 7th, the next day, the day after the town meeting, my bill, House Bill 18, the bill that required the approval of the community before an oil refinery could be cited within its bounds, was heard before the New Hampshire legislature. The House was packed, and so was the balcony. People and media had come from all over the world to witness the vote. But preceding the vote on House Bill 18 was a vote on House Bill 34, which would establish an energy siting body that would have the authority to override any zoning or wishes of the community in the siting of energy facilities. It was voted down, setting the stage for House Bill 18, the Home Rule Bill. I made an impassioned speech asking for the votes of those from Coos to the sea, and the non-binding but huge no vote in Durham the night before was there to help persuade legislators from Berlin and Salem and Nashua and Concord and Manchester to join the legislators from the Seacoast, and the bill became law. And it was over. And in reporting on that day, the New Hampshire Times had this to say. It said, a century from now, when historians look back on the 1974 session of the New Hampshire legislature, they'll call it the oil refinery session and remember March 7th as a turning point in New Hampshire history. That's the day when unexpectedly the 400-member House, the House too big to be bought, said no to the plan of a foreign billionaire to build a $600 million oil refining complex on Durham Point in violation of the local zoning ordinance. So the House never specifically voted against the oil refinery, and the town of Durham never addressed the question of a zoning ordinance variance because Olympic never asked for variance. Olympic knew they would fail when on March 6th, Durham voted 9-1 to oppose a refinery, and on March 7th, the New Hampshire House voted to sustain the town's right to have the final say. And nearly 40 years later, a bench constructed from 60-million-year-old New Hampshire granite was made with proceeds left over from a production of a wonderful play called Oily Bay. The bench is inscribed, Durham says no to Olympic oil, March 1974. And here am I, Phyllis, and Nancy on the bench, which has been placed on Wagon Hill Farm in Durham by the lovely Bay. So, the shoals survive as the sun continues to rise and set over our beautiful ocean. And we have no more. I want to tell you one final story, and it is that a group of us went out to dinner the night of the vote in the legislature. We went to a restaurant in Concord, Nancy and I and others, and we're sitting around this round table, and across the room you can see the the Texas Instruments, the Pervin and Gertz people, all the consultants for the refinery were there, and they stood up one by one, and they came over towards us, and I thought, oh my God, they're going to tell us they're going to do it in Newmarket, they're going to do it in Maine, someplace that would have ruined the Seacoast just as much as had it gone in Durham. But one by one, they came up to us, and Mr. Green, the leader, put his hand out. And this line, he said, I just want you to know the right side won. And that felt very good, I can tell you. That was good. So any questions? Any thoughts?
Questions from the room?
What do you think? What do you think the Seacoast would look like if we had that? Do you think it would sort of have survived? And
Do you know of any more, in a similar vein to this story, any other like successful regulations have been put in place to prevent the building of oil refineries in similar circumstances?
no, I don't know of any that have. And I have to tell you also that it occurred to me while I was putting in this whole bill that I should also include aluminum smelting plants, any other really huge intrusive thing, but I was persuaded not to do that, to concentrate on the oil refinery. I did, and there has been no other proposal to have oil refinery in Hampshire or in New England. So, let me just tell you one little piece of strategy that I had. I couldn't sleep for these 6 months. And you wake up at night terrified that I had done something wrong and that my bill was going to be used to be amended so that we would be in favor of the refinery. But I found it very, very. But then I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I will say, here are these regulations, regulations to prevent spillage or too many trucks or something, safety regulations. Make it the safest oil refinery ever. And I thought that'll do it. And then my friend, Martin Rhodes, said to me, so you'd be all right with that refinery. It's okay if they build that refinery as long as it's safe. And suddenly I realized, no, I don't want any refinery. And it was an easy thing finally when I was focused on it.
Thanks so much for that talk. That was, I mean, I was sitting back here like almost tearing up. I mean, that was a great story, and I'm very grateful for what you did to allow all of us to come out here and continue to come out here and learn in such a pristine environment. I guess I kind of have two questions that are a little related. One, I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about your path into politics and just public service before this unfolded, and maybe secondly along those lines, like what shaped your views on the environment, and what was it that what made you choose like politics as a route to affect that change and to represent those values?
I don't know why I chose it, but I guess I did. I did. I was in the New Hampshire legislature for 4 years, 2 terms, and then I was on the governor's council, of which I'm sure nobody knows anything. But the governor's council is a very important branch of the New Hampshire government, which it means that there are 5 people elected who serve on the governor's council with the governor. And every penny beyond $15,000 that the state spends on anything has to be approved by the governor's council, which is pretty amazing. And it's a way of stopping many things. And lots of things haven't, because the council has not approved the town board, have been encouraged because the council did, and so pay attention to the governor's council. And then I ran for, Congress in 1984, and it was a smashing law. I don't think I got a single, I didn't get a single Republican vote, and so I ran. And then I think I actually decided I would work for other people.
The environment.
That's behind everything that I do. When I see the signs here saying how much water you can take, 2 showers a week, that'll be plenty. I can see the sense of that. I can see that, and I'm sure it's uncomfortable for people, but I don't know. And I think we're at a real crisis point there, and in so many other ways in this country, when the environment is what you're considering. Climate change is dreaded.
I'm wondering if you could give some hope for the students who are here to follow the same kind of path that you have set in light of the Chevron decision that turns over the power of people who are experts, especially in science, to rule on how we should look at the environment, and instead turns it over to the courts. I think it's a battle that you have lots of expertise to help inform them how to move forward.
I don't know. It's such a huge problem. I will say a mantra that I would have would be to listen to the whistleblowers. There'll be people in the government, and this is becoming more and more obvious. There'll be people in the government who see things that they know are not what they should be. And if they don't speak out and have the support of those of us who agree with them, that's going to be a shame. So I don't know how to answer your question. I do know that the vote of the people your age, the age of people in this room, is very, very important to this election. I hope you're all familiar with Project 2025 and are aware of the new president of its Trump would do. So that's all I'll say about that. But vote one way or the other. Anyway, thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm sorry I got off the start.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for talking. I'm Rohan. I'm a search here. I spent a little time on the Hill as an intern, and that was a time when I was initially wanting to go into politics for a while, and I was really disheartened by the level of conflicts that emerged there. Became very, very clear, and actually turned me away from that path completely. And I switched my tracks to science completely. But what's your advice to people, like, how do you build a career in like making change now, like in an era of like incredibly toxic like levels of partisanship, like in a country that's kind of tearing itself apart? It feels a little hopeless to a degree. So
hopeless.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still like working for it, but like, what's your advice to young people doing like entering the Senate field?
Do it. Just do it. I can't honestly give you anything. I mean, just study, figure out what the right thing is, what you believe is the right thing, support other people who are doing it. I don't know, and look. several, I had the example, for instance, of, I think the film that we saw mentioned the prisoners who were at the Navy shipyard in the prison. And one day I came home from something and I could smell aerosol in the room. And it was my husband who was in the basement spray painting Free Harvey and Daniel on our sail on our boat. So that we then went out onto the river and sailed back and forth in front of the prison saying Free Harvey and Daniel. And although I felt very, very good about it, the Coast Guard came and told us to, quote unquote, get off the river. I don't know how you're supposed to do that. But anyway, we somehow managed. And so that's one example in my life when something sort of spontaneous happened. Those guys got out within 3 months. They had been in prison for 4 years, and their sentences were for 10 years. They had done nothing except speak out against the Vietnam War. They were Marines, and they didn't say they wouldn't fight, that they didn't support it. If they didn't feel it was a black man's war, and they were black. So that was one example. Another example in my life is I was sitting on the couch in my living room reading the UNH Alumni magazine, and there was a picture of a couple sitting on their couch, handsome couple, and they were Hubert and Helen. They were from Niger. No, they were not. They were from Congo, and they. The story says that they had to come to this country because Hubert's life had been threatened. He had been supporting the pygmies in Congo, and terrorists had come and tried to cut off his head and had made his 7 children and his wife want as they tried to cut off his head. They didn't succeed. And Hubert and Helen came to this country, leaving the 7 children behind. When I read that, and I said, I can do something about that. I had frequent fire miles. So I called somebody, I got a name in the article somehow, and I called that person. I said, I can help. I have frequent fire miles. She said, you have no idea how much other things you need. So for the next 6 months, it was just as intense as the oil refinery. For the next 6 months, I spent my life getting those 7 children here. And eventually we succeeded, but it was absolutely incredible. The hoops we had to jump through, the money we had to raise, thousands and thousands of dollars. The embassy, these children had been forced to watch their father be injured. When the mother, Hubert and Helen, when they left and came here, they left the children in the care of his cousin. That cousin defended their father, and he was captured. Her lips were cut off, and he was raped and murdered. So then, what are we going to do with the children? So we found another family related to them to take care of the children, and they did. Although we were on the phone with them one time, we could hear gunshots because the terrorists had now come for that family again. So we got that very day, we got the money that we had saved, a long way from oil refining. We had gotten the money that we had saved, and we put them on a bus, got them on a bus to go to the safety, relative safety of Uganda, where they spent 6 months, and with 4 months, because this was 2 months into it. And eventually, we were able to get them to come here because we had the help of a Republican member of Congress, Jeff Bradley, who was terrific, and a very competent immigration lawyer. But that was something that just came to me. And it seems to me if you read any newspaper and you read somebody in trouble, there's something you can do. But sometimes there is, not always, that's for sure, but sometimes there is. So.
Are there any other questions? I think these are some really good examples of ways that people can make a difference. They think globally, act locally, that some of those changes are ones of much bigger impacts than what you initially think your impacts are going to have. I know that I personally am unbelievably grateful for what Dudley has done for the Seacoast and the Shoals Marine Lab. None of us would be here if it was not for her efforts. And so I want to give her another round of applause for coming this evening and for her work.
Thank you. You can do it.